My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 70 years old, and I never imagined that my greatest wound would come from inside my own home. I raised a son with love, sacrifice, and dignity, only to face betrayal in the years I should be resting in peace. "Mom, it's our family money, not yours," he shouted that day, his words slicing deeper than any knife. The worst scars are carved not by strangers, but by family. That was the moment I understood. The bond of blood can twist into chains. My patience ended, and my vengeance quietly began. And before I go on, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Share your city or state in the comments, because stories like this happen closer than you think. The day had been ordinary until the sound of the front door changed everything. It slammed open with such violence that the hinges groaned, as if the house itself recoiled from the storm about to enter. I was folding clean laundry in my bedroom, a task I often used to calm my thoughts, when Marcus's furious footsteps tore through the hallway. I knew that rhythm, the heavy stomp of a man who had learned to use noise as a weapon. When he called out for me, his voice carried not just anger but the weight of entitlement. The echo of someone convinced that what was mine belonged to him. I stepped out and saw him standing in the living room. At 42 years old, Marcus looked more like a cornered animal than the child I once held in my arms. His green eyes, his father's eyes, were ablaze, and his fists tightened as though he were fighting invisible chains. My stomach twisted at the sight. He had come not to speak, not to reason, but to demand. His words struck me like stones hurled against glass. Why did Chloe call me crying? Why did I humiliate her at the grocery store? Why would I change the password on my own bank card? In his mind, it wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs. The family's, a collective treasure he believed he had earned by simply existing. I wanted to answer with calm, to remind him that I was still his mother, still a woman who had given him decades of her life. But what came out was sharper, steadier than even I expected. "Marcus, lower your voice. We are educated people." It was the voice of a teacher, not a mother. I could feel the room shift, as if my words had drawn a line in the floor between us. He stepped closer, to strides that brought him within striking distance, and for the first time in 70 years, I felt fear of my own blood. Not fear of harm to my body, but fear that the boy I raised was gone, replaced by a man blinded by greed. The silence that followed was heavier than his anger. It was the silence of realization that this fight was not about a password, not about Chloe's tears in front of strangers at a grocery store. It was about power, about control, about a son who believed he had the right to strip his mother of dignity because he saw her age as weakness. In that moment, I knew this story would not end with reconciliation. It would not end with forgiveness. It would end with a reckoning, one that he never saw coming. Marcus's anger did not subside with my words. Instead, it grew sharper, cutting through the air like a blade. He paced the living room as though it were his battlefield, his voice rising with each accusation. He said Chloe had been humiliated in front of strangers, forced to leave behind groceries because of my selfishness. Each word struck me like a public verdict, as though I had committed a crime for defending what was mine. I stood in the doorway, my body stiff but my resolve firm. For decades, I had carried this family through storms, through bills and illnesses, through funerals and lonely nights. Now my son dared to reduce all of that to a single moment, shouting that I had betrayed them. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but laughter would only ignite his fury further. So I chose silence, letting his rage echo against walls built by my sacrifice. When he stopped pacing, his green eyes fixed on me with venom. He said, "You owe us, Mom. You wouldn't have survived without us." The irony burned hotter than fire. I had lived 70 years before this day. 70 years of labor and teaching, of paying my own way when no one offered help. The house he stood in, the ground beneath his feet, all of it was built without a cent of his contribution. Yet he dared to call me a debtor. I felt a tremor in my chest, not of fear but of awakening. His words stripped away any illusion that love alone could bind us. I realized Marcus did not see me as a mother anymore, but as a vault, a resource to exploit until it was empty. That recognition hardened me. My silence turned into steel, and though I spoke little, each word carried the weight of judgment. I told him, "My card, my choice. That will never change." His face reddened, fists clenched tighter. But for the first time, he seemed uncertain. The authority he once believed unshakable was crumbling. He could yell, but I would not bend. He could accuse, but I would not break. I had carried him as a child, but I would not carry his entitlement as a man. In that stillness, I realized something crucial. When love turns into demand, resistance becomes survival. That day, survival required defiance. And now, as you listen to these words, remember, this is only the beginning. What followed would not only test the strength of my patience, but reveal the depth of betrayal I had never expected to endure. So stay with me until the very end, because the choices I made after that moment will shock you in ways you cannot yet imagine. Marcus did not retreat. His steps carried him deeper into the living room, as though he owned the very walls surrounding us. His voice cracked with fury as he demanded, "What kind of mother turns her back on her family?" The accusation struck harder than his volume. I had not turned my back. I had defended myself. Yet he twisted reality into a blade, pressing guilt against me as if it were truth. I watched him circle the space like a predator searching for weakness. His words grew heavier, accusing me of valuing money over blood, of humiliating his wife intentionally. He insisted that my refusal was cruelty, a betrayal of everything a mother should be. Inside, I felt the flicker of anger transform into fire. He no longer argued about a password. He accused me of abandoning the very role I had sacrificed my life to fulfill. I reminded him, calm yet firm, that my sacrifices had paved his path. I told him about nights spent grading papers until dawn, mornings waking early to prepare his meals, years of balancing bills so he could have opportunities I never did. He sneered at my words, saying, "That was your job, Mom. Don't act like you did me a favor." The venom in that single sentence burned deeper than any wound. Gratitude had not only vanished, it had turned into disdain. The room seemed smaller, suffocating, as I realized this confrontation was more than a quarrel. It was a declaration of war, one that he believed he could win through intimidation. But the longer he spoke, the clearer it became to me that he had already lost. He could not strip away my dignity. He could not erase my history. What he revealed, instead, was his own weakness, a man who mistook dependency for power. I felt my spine straighten, my voice sharpen. I told him that respect was not a gift, it was earned, and he had squandered it long ago. His lips tightened, his jaw locked, but for the first time he did not respond. The silence between us was louder than his shouting. It was a silence that told me I had struck the core of his arrogance, exposing the emptiness beneath his demands. In that silence, vengeance took root. As I recount these moments, understand that this story does not soften with time. It grows heavier. What happened next was not reconciliation, but escalation. My son believed he could reduce me to submission, but he underestimated 70 years of resilience forged through loss and survival. If you find yourself drawn into this storm, I ask you now, make your presence known. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let your voice rise where mine once stood alone. Marcus finally crossed the last invisible line between us. His voice shook the walls as he shouted that I had no right to control the money while he struggled to provide for his family. He declared that the card was not mine, that it was meant for all of us, as though my life's work and savings existed only to serve him. In that moment, I saw not my son, but a stranger wearing his face. He stepped closer until I could feel the heat of his anger radiating from his skin. His fists tightened at his sides, and for a brief moment I wondered if his rage would turn physical. The boy I once rocked to sleep now towered over me like an adversary. I kept my composure, my voice steady as I told him, "Marcus, the money in that account was earned by me alone, not you, not Chloe, me." The fury in his eyes deepened, but behind it, I caught a flicker of desperation. He spoke quickly, almost pleading, saying that Chloe felt ashamed, that their daughter needed more, that the world was too expensive to survive without help. His desperation might have moved another woman to pity, but I had lived too long to mistake manipulation for honesty. His words were not cries for support. They were shackles, designed to chain me to endless sacrifice. I thought of the years I had spent teaching students about integrity, about the strength of standing alone when the world demanded surrender. And now, here I was, confronted by my own blood, demanding I abandon those values. I realized then that this was the point of no return. Once spoken, his words could not be undone. Once revealed, his greed could not be forgotten. There was no turning back to the son I had raised. My answer came cold and sharp. I told him that respect for my boundaries was not optional. I reminded him that the woman he faced had endured widowhood, loneliness, and the weight of raising him without complaint. If he believed he could crush me now, he was gravely mistaken. His lips trembled as he searched for a response, but nothing came. For the first time, he looked smaller, diminished, a man exposed by his own arrogance. This confrontation was no longer about groceries or bank cards. It was about survival, mine, not his. I understood that his hunger would never be satisfied, that giving once would only invite more demands, and so, my silence turned into resolve. I vowed that day I would never again allow him to dictate the terms of my life. If you believe in standing firm against betrayal, let your support be unsubscribe, and stand with me as this story darkens further. After Marcus stormed out that afternoon, the house seemed to breathe again, but its silence was heavy, almost suffocating. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by shadows that stretched across the walls, and I realized something important. This was no longer just a quarrel between mother and son. It was a battle for control, and I could not afford to lose. My dignity, my independence, and my very survival were now at stake. I walked back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, the folded laundry still lying untouched. His words replayed in my mind like broken glass, cutting deeper each time. "You owe us, Mom." That sentence had shifted something inside me. No longer did I see myself as a victim of his anger. I saw myself as a woman preparing for a war that had been disguised as family loyalty. The next morning, I began taking small steps he would never notice until it was too late. I reviewed my accounts, locked away my checkbook, and called the bank to strengthen every layer of security. My money was mine, but now it would also become my weapon. I was no longer protecting only myself. I was preparing to show Marcus that betrayal comes with a price. Quiet vengeance is patient, and mine was only beginning to take shape. I thought of Chloe as well, her voice trembling on the phone, crying at the grocery store. She wanted me to feel guilty, to bow under the weight of her shame. But instead, I felt clarity. She had played her part well, framing herself as the victim while pushing Marcus into confrontation. I would not forget her role in this. My vengeance would not be loud or reckless, but it would reach her too. At night, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, drafting plans that were more than financial. They were emotional, psychological. I would teach my son a lesson he would never forget, one that would cut deeper than denial of money. I would show him that when a mother decides she has given enough, her silence is no longer weakness, is strategy. He would learn that the woman he tried to control was far stronger than he ever imagined. The days that followed were calm on the surface, but inside me, a storm was carefully brewing. Marcus avoided visiting, perhaps ashamed of his own outburst, or perhaps waiting for me to break and call him. I did not. Instead, I rehearsed my silence like a weapon, sharpening it every morning. My absence in his daily life was the first lesson. The well he once drank from was now dry, and thirst would force him to face himself. I began withdrawing, not just financially, but emotionally. Phone calls from Chloe went unanswered, and her desperate texts asking for small favors remained ignored. I knew her tactic well, the sugar-coated words, hiding sharpened demands. They thought persistence would wear me down, but with every ignored message, I felt stronger, more certain. Their frustration grew, and with it, my resolve deepened. Revenge does not always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with silence that cuts deeper than screams. One afternoon, I visited the bank in person. The manager, a kind woman younger than Marcus, greeted me with respect. I explained the situation in careful detail, choosing my words wisely, painting a portrait of protection rather than vengeance. I left that office with accounts locked tighter than any vault and a quiet satisfaction. Marcus believed he could intimidate me, but he would soon learn that age did not make me weak. It made me careful, deliberate, untouchable. I also began reaching into memories, pulling out the sacrifices I had made that Marcus conveniently forgot. The extra shifts, the sleepless nights, the years of denying myself luxuries so he could live comfortably. Those memories no longer stung, they fortified me. They became the bricks of a wall he could never climb. Each recollection turned into a reminder that I owed him nothing more. And when he finally returned, he would find a woman no longer willing to bend. Chloe's humiliation at the grocery store became my weapon, not my shame. I told myself that every glare she felt, every whisper she imagined, was her own creation. I had not placed her in that position, her entitlement had, and as the gossip spread through her circle, I knew she blamed me entirely. That was good. Let her anger fester, let her resentment grow. Sometimes the sweetest vengeance is to allow others to choke on the bitterness of their own choices. If you are still listening, then you already understand how betrayal transforms us. It does not simply wound, it forges something new. What Marcus and Chloe saw as cruelty was in fact justice, a reckoning long overdue, and this is only the beginning. The moves I made next would change the course of our family forever. So, before we continue, make sure you are part of this journey. Subscribe now, because the end will be darker than you expect. The first time Marcus returned after our silence, I was ready. He walked into my house without knocking, his face tight with frustration, and demanded to know why I was ignoring their calls. His words carried less fire this time, but more calculation. He believed that if anger did not work, guilt might. I sat in my armchair, steady and silent, watching him fumble for authority he no longer possessed. His presence no longer shook, MIT fueled me. He asked me directly, "Mom, do you want your granddaughter to suffer?" He thought the mention of his child would pierce my heart, but it only revealed the depths of his manipulation. I reminded him calmly that a child's needs were her parents' responsibility, not her grandmother's wallet. The shock in his eyes was almost satisfying. He had expected tears, perhaps surrender. Instead, he received words sharper than any blade. My responsibility ended where his began. Chloe arrived a few days later, uninvited, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She told me she wanted peace, that she hated seeing the family divided. But beneath her words was the same demand: access to what was mine. She complained about rising bills, about how difficult it was to manage a household in today's world. I listened, nodded politely, and when she paused, I answered with one sentence. "Chloe, dignity is earned, not begged for." Her face hardened instantly. After they left, I realized my power no longer came from money alone. It came from the choices I made, the boundaries I enforced, and the strength to refuse. Marcus and Chloe thought I would bend, but every confrontation only carved me deeper into stone. I was not just resisting, I was preparing. I began making arrangements, subtle and precise, that would ensure my independence until the day I took my last breath. They would never hold leverage over me again. I started documenting every interaction, keeping notes of their words, their visits, their threats, disguised as pleas. This record was not just for MIT, was for the story I would leave behind. Proof of how a mother's love can be twisted by ungrateful children. The act of writing gave me clarity, sharpening my resolve. They wanted me to feel powerless, but in truth, I had never been stronger. Their betrayal had given me something priceless: purpose. So now, as you hear my voice, know this silence is not weakness, and age is not surrender. When pushed beyond the breaking point, even the quietest soul can rise in vengeance. And I promise you, the steps I take next will not only shock Marcus and Chloe, but they may shock you as well. If you believe this story deserves to be heard, share it. Let others see how betrayal transforms into power. The final act of my vengeance did not begin with shouting or confrontation. It began with precision. I had spent weeks studying my finances, shifting accounts, and placing everything under layers of protection. Marcus and Chloe could never penetrate, but I did more than protect. I rewrote my will, placing conditions that would echo long after I was gone. If they wanted to inherit anything from me, they would first have to confront the truth of what they had done. When Marcus returned again, his voice was softer, almost rehearsed. He said he was sorry, that he had spoken in anger, that Chloe had only wanted the best for their daughter. His words carried the perfume of insincerity, each syllable dripping with performance. I let him finish, then looked directly into his eyes and told him, "Apologies are worthless when they come, only after doors are closed." His face fell, the act collapsing under the weight of my defiance. Chloe tried next, knocking on my door with a plate of cookies, pretending reconciliation. She spoke about family, about forgiveness, about moving forward. But I noticed her eyes darting to my purse on the table, her hands restless as though itching to grab what she believed was hers. I told her, with a calmness she could not match. Chloe, family is not built on manipulation, it is built on respect. And respect is something you lost a long time ago. The tension between us grew thicker with each passing day, but instead of caving, I thrived in it. My solitude became my fortress, my silence, my blade. Every attempt they made to guilt me, every false smile they wore, only fed my resolve. They wanted submission, but what they created instead was a reckoning. And deep down, I knew the lesson would scar them more than any punishments spoken aloud. I began speaking to neighbors, subtly weaving truths into conversations. They would hear how Marcus had shouted at me, how Chloe had cried in public over a card that was never hers. I did not need to invent Liza. Truth was enough, and it spread quietly, wrapping around them like a noose. Reputation, once stained, is not easily restored. Let them live in the shadow of their own actions, for shame can be heavier than chains. So understand this, vengeance is not always fire and fury. Sometimes it is a steady hand, a calm refusal, a silence that echoes louder than screams. I chose my path carefully, and I have no regrets. And now I turn to UF. You were in my place. Would you have done the same? Leave your thoughts below, because betrayal is a language many have suffered, but few have dared to answer with strength.